Hi, welcome back to my channel, Manga Hoarder. My name is Laura, and today I am wrapping up my Read Manga 19 challenge for February. I'm not entirely sure when this is going up, but I suspect it's going to go up after the 1001 Comics video. And if you've watched that one, you've already know that I didn't have a very good reading month. You know, I did participate in a readathon, but apart from that, I haven't read a lot, and particularly I didn't read a lot from my TBR. So this is basically what it looks like. I write down everything that I am planning to read in the month, and then I write down everything I did read, and you can see that it's not a huge list, and this includes all of my readathon reads. So I did participate, it looks like, on February the 10th, and I participated in the Manga Love Readathon, which I will link up down below if you're interested in checking out that video. But I also have, you know, a pretty big list of things that I want to accomplish. I am working on kind of two projects. One is the Read Manga 19 challenge, which is a list of prompts. You're welcome to join in if you want. It's totally not too late. You know, it's only March now, so it's definitely not too late to join in. I think you probably could join in until October and read most of those prompts, depending on how fast you read. But I am trying to work through those methodically throughout the year. As you will notice in this video, I have not read all of the prompts that I was supposed to for the month of February, so I will be a little behind now. And I also am working on a 1001 Comics project, and I will link up my last wrap-up down below or up in the cards if you're interested in checking that out. Also haven't been reading as much for that. Hopefully March will be better. So at any rate, I'm just going to go through, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I was planning to read, and then tell you a little bit about the books that I did end up reading, which is not very many, so hopefully this will be a short video. First of all, I like to read some alphabets, so I have these blue slips which come out of my TBR jar. In February I pulled out A, S, and E, so basically the plan is to read one manga that start with every single letter of the alphabet. You know, I could just pick them randomly from the manga that I'm reading, but I also want to make sure that I'm reading the whole alphabet and not being kind of stuck at the end of the year not finishing this. So I have 3 alphabets here picked, and according to my book, I did not read A, and so I did read S and E. So for the A prompt, that one, S and E is here. So for the A prompt, this one actually will just get refolded and go back into my TBR jar, and I will select from this shelf again in the future. So first off, I'm going to talk about my S pick. This one doesn't fulfill any of my other criteria apart from starting with the letter S. So I ended up reading Suki or Ski by Clamp. So I read volumes 1, volume 2, and volume 3, so it's just a 3-volume long series. It is a little bit of an older title. It was published by Tokyo Pop, and it is sort of an age gap romance, which is, you know, there's a few of them that have been translated into English, but they're kind of few and far between, so this one is sort of interesting. This is basically the story about 2 neighbors. One is a young girl who is in high school, probably in, I can't remember if she's in 12th grade, and a new neighbor who has moved in next door who just happens to be her teacher. Now they have an instant sort of connection with each other, but a friend of hers is not entirely convinced that this connection is good, or that this man's motives are true, that there isn't something else sort of lingering between these two. Basically what you discover is that the girl herself is from a wealthy family, and she has experienced kidnappings in the past, and it just happens to be a very kind of naive or very trusting person, and so she has chosen to make the decision that despite how people have treated her, she's always going to trust people because that's the best way to live. And so even though her neighbor may have sort of some hidden agenda, she has sort of chosen to trust him, and there is sort of this very cute relationship that develops between them. Now, I mentioned that there is an additional friend, and this friend is very concerned about, of course, the main character in this relationship and knows about what's going on. There's also a friend of the teacher who also happens to be knowing what is going on, and so this is really primarily the cast of this title. There's only about 4 characters who really make up this entire story, which really works for a really short story like this. You know, you get a little bit of the story of each of these characters, but you don't have to draw things out too far. This one is reminds me a little bit of Clamp's other title, Chobits. In that title, if you've read it, you'll know that Chobits, the Persicom, or personal computer, android girl, she is sort of learning to become a human by reading these stories. So she's picking up these children's stories and is getting information about sort of how to live and how to interact in her relationship through them. That is the same scenario that is happening here, and so this girl is actually picking up her favorite sort of series of stories. There are children's stories, picture books, and they feature 2 bears and sort of how they interact with each other. And so it parallels what is going on in her own life, this story, and there's, you know, a convenient little ending for that. I thought it was really cute. I really like the relationship. I like the friendships in this. I like the characters in this. And, you know, Clamp just weaves a really clever story and has really interesting character dynamics. You know, despite that there's only 4 main characters in this, like, it's enough. And, I enjoyed this quite a lot. I did mention that it is sort of an age gap romance, and so, you know, it is called Ski, which is like, and so it is called a like story, not a love story. And so it is trying to keep it very innocent. So, you know, if you are opposed to age gap romance, I think this one is tending to really keep it sort of more safe in that respect. But apart from that, you know, I really, really did like this. I had a lot of fun rereading it. It's been a long, long time since I've picked it up. I didn't really remember what it was about. And I enjoyed it, so I know I will enjoy it again in the future. So the next title comes from the closet, and that's why I picked it, is Even So I Will Love You Tenderly by Ko Yoneda. This is a BL or yaoi manga. It is about 2 office workers. I can't remember if they work in the same office, but at some point they are thrown together and they become good friends. One of the men is straight, the other man is gay, and the gay man has fallen in love, of course, with his straight friend. And through most of the first half of the book is struggling with that, with having to suppress his feelings, with having to not even let his friend know that he is gay, you know, because he is worried about ruining this relationship. But he also wants to hold tightly onto this relationship because even the friendship is valuable to him. Of course, he has to make his declaration. It ends up coming out, and then sort of the second half of the book is about the straight man sort of struggling with this declaration. What is he going to do with it? I think you can kind of decide, you already know what path it's going to take, but if I talk too much about it, it will just be spoiler territory because it is a very short book. I think the main reason that I don't read a lot of BL manga is because it is all so short, and so it is very difficult to write really strong, deep stories, and to, in my opinion, I just have a hard time remembering them. But this one in particular, I remember quite a bit better than I think other titles that I've read. I also think that the characters' struggles feel a little bit more defined and fleshed out, and I feel a little more sympathetic to the characters. I thought that this was definitely one of the better BL titles that came from the closet so far, or that I've read in general. So if you are a BL fan, BL reader, you probably will like this title. I think it was quite good. I also really liked the art. I like how the men are drawn. You know, there isn't a lot of action. It is mostly talking, interaction. But I think that, you know, it is drawn quite nicely. And as far as I know, I think that there is a companion series. I think that this is the companion series, No Touching at All, also by Ko Yoneda, and I'm not entirely sure if this is just another book by her or if they are about other characters from the same world. But my sister did tell me to read both of them together. I just didn't get a chance to get to this one. I feel like I've read it before though, so I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, I definitely would recommend checking this one out. So I already mentioned another part of my TBR is to read something from the closet. So I had chosen Even So I Will Love You Tenderly, which I read. And then I also want to read something from my oversized shelf. I had chosen Appleseed, which I did not read. Appleseed was also on my TBR for a title that I finished purchasing last year and one of my out-of-print titles that I wanted to read this year. So again, did not satisfy. It was also supposed to satisfy my starts with the letter A. So I really just, you know, not reading that title really kind of caused problems with my TBR plans. As for the prompts for the Read Manga 19, those are the only ones I think that are left. I had to read a digital first or digital only title. I did not do this. It just didn't fit into my budget, and I didn't want to just read a title from the library because I know that most of those titles I can actually purchase. I really did want to read a title that was only available digitally, and I just couldn't afford it last month. But what I am going to do is I'm going to save this one. I'm not going to put it back in the jar, and when my I have to rearrange my budget a little bit, but when I can afford to do this, I do have a little video project that I'm going to do with this particular prompt, so that one is just going to come out from the jar. I also was supposed to read a meta manga, which I was going to read in Akihabara at Deep, or Nononba. Nononba was for my 1001 Comics project, didn't read it, also didn't read Akihabara at Deep, so this prompt is going back in the jar. Probably the easiest prompt on here is Character with Superpowers. For that I was going to read ES, or Eternal Sabbath, by Fuyumi Soryo. Again, a title I didn't read. It also was supposed to satisfy a title that started with the letter E, so unfortunately I just didn't end up reading this particular challenge this month, or last month I mean, so this one is again going to go back in the jar. So the only prompt that I ended up actually completing is this one, which is music or art, and it really is any title that had anything to do with music or art in any way. So, you know, characters that sing or are in a band, or just end up going to an art show at some point, or anything like that. And I did add this as a prompt for this Read Manga 19 challenge because this is the title that I wanted to read, and that is Honey and Clover. So I have been thinking about this for a while, and I had never really gotten very far into this. I think I'd only read 3 volumes of this before, and wanted to get back to it. I was reading it as it was releasing. As I recall, like, I thought it probably was pretty good, but my sister was telling me after I started reading this, and I was telling her how much I was enjoying it, that she's like, didn't you tell me that this one was so boring and I shouldn't read it? So apparently I was not enjoying it the first time I read it. But I was reading this back in like 2005 maybe. What is this published? Oh, 2008. So it hasn't even been that long, like 10 years, 11 years. I apparently was not enjoying this as much as I think or remember enjoying it, or maybe I was just warning her because I didn't think she would enjoy it. Whatever the case is, I enjoyed this so much. I rated every single volume 5 stars, which is Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, Volume 4, Volume 5, Volume 6, Volume 7, Volume 8, Volume 9, and Volume 10. So I'm going to hold up Volume 10 just because all of the characters are on it except for the teacher, who I think is on Volume 9. This teacher here. There's also this character who kind of appears and plays a part, but I don't think has a great deal of story. So there is this teacher, and then most importantly these 5 students, and they all, particularly students, all get sort of an equal amount of story. It is all told basically through this young man. He is the narrator of the story. It's his thoughts that progress the story along, which is sort of unusual. You know, usually it is the female character, because this is a story written for women. This is a josei manga. It does read a lot like shoujo manga. I'll talk about that a little bit, but because this is a story written for women, it usually, the pattern is that it is narrated by a woman, just because that's sort of who you would relate to. This is narrated by this young man, which I think was a really clever way to tell this story. It really frames the story in a different way, because even though he's part of the action, he could also kind of step outside of it and be sort of a non-affected observer of the situation, and I think that really worked, particularly worked for me this time as I was reading it. Superficially, I would say that this feels a lot like shoujo manga. I think if you're a shoujo manga reader, you will enjoy this story. You know, it definitely has a lot of the tropes and the scenarios and the romantic situations that you're looking for in shoujo manga. Primarily, all of these characters do get paired up. There is a lot of love triangles. There's a lot of one-sided love. There's all of these different situations that are happening in these romantic relationships. If you're here just for that, there's a lot of that going on in this. There's a lot of angst in relation to that. I don't think that that's the main part or point of this story, but it does sort of play or progress the actual plot of the story along. What I think is actually the most important, and I think it's sort of just a layer down, and it is sort of the thing that relates it to more of a josei reading audience, is that this is a story about students who are in school and who are sort of discovering what it is they really truly want to do with their lives. Particularly as art students, they're having existential crisis about what does it mean to be an artist? What can I do with my art? What is art, and what is the value of art for me, and who am I? Because you have to define yourself in order to become an artist. There's all of this discussion that underlies this entire story, and every single character in this story gets to go through their own existential discovery of themselves as an artist. I think that if you went into reading this, I think that there are different types of readers who would appreciate this, and you would appreciate it for different types of things. Certainly if you're a shoujo reader and you love reading angsty, romantic dramas, this will do very well for you. Certainly if you're in college and you are sort of or any time of your life where you feel directionless, or you're looking forward to what the future holds and you're kind of afraid to take that step, this will relate to you. I think also if you are luckily one of the few who are artists and who are looking at your identity and trying to express who you are through your art, you probably will get the most out of this story. Because there is sort of these different things that are going on in it. I thought it was great. I related to it a lot on different kinds of levels. I would recommend it to pretty broad-reaching audience. I think it is definitely worth reading, and I am so glad I did read it again. Finally finished reading it. I was ugly crying by the end of reading it, and I definitely want to read it again. Hopefully I'll get to do that maybe next year. Maybe next year I'll make a list of titles I want to prioritize rereading, because this would definitely be on that list. So that's everything I ended up reading for February. Not a whole lot, really just 3 titles. But I did enjoy pretty much everything I read last month, which is a big accomplishment in my opinion. I still am trying to read 500 volumes of manga by the end of the year, so I really need to pick up the pace. I am still really slumpy, so I am struggling to read the books that I'm planning to read, but I am hopeful that March will be better, hopefully. I already have read some of the titles off of my list, so we're working on it, and maybe I will do better. At any rate, if you've read any of these titles, I'd love to know what your thoughts are on them. And anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.